Eventually, your cattle herd gets too big and you need to find new grass for them to graze on. Today, it's about converting old row crop fields into perennial grazing grasslands. Stay tuned for that, coming up. Welcome to Grassfed Life. I'm your host, Diego. Over the past few years, Darby's slowly grown his cattle herd. And as he's grown it, he's outgrown his existing pasture. So last fall, he began the process of converting over some old row crop fields into new perennial grazing land. That's what we're talking about today. Darby's going to go through his thought process behind why he's doing what he's doing. It's a process that's evolved over time because this isn't the first time that Darby's taken row crop field and turned it into grass. He's done it in the past and he learned a few things along the way. Now he's implementing a lot of those changes, and that's the focus of today's show. We'll get into his thoughts on bale grazing, thoughts on fertilization, and how to choose seeds. There's a lot in here. Enjoy it. Converting row crop land to perennial pasture with Darby Simpson. Right now, you're mid-process of converting a 16-acre row crop field into a perennial grazing pasture. Let's start at a very high level, the 30,000-foot view. Why take 16 acres out of row crop field and convert them over into pasture?
For us, it's very simple. Our cattle herd's growing, and we need more area for perennial grazing. We desperately needed more area to grow that operation, and this was just the next most logical step.
16 acres, when you look at that, how quick can you convert something like that over to where you could put cows on it? This seems to be an email question we get a lot where people want to take some existing land and they either want to roll out round bales and start grazing cattle on it. You go the seeding approach. Can you talk about maybe the first approach of just first taking that land and rolling out round bales and why you would or would not do that, and then we'll get into seeding it out?
Yeah, sure. So that's what's referred to as bale grazing, or you can unroll the bales and actually feed it that way. It does a couple of things. It does, well, really three things. So when you do that, you get the cows to move around on that area, and then so you're moving their manure and urine, which are obviously beneficial to the soil. You get some organic matter in all of those different areas, regardless if you're unrolling it or doing the bale grazing. And then lastly, you get seeds out of that forage that you're feeding to the cows to begin to replenish the seed bank and hopefully sprout new plants in the area you're wanting to convert. So that's a method that a lot of guys use.
I guess the advantage I'm thinking from the outside of doing something like that is I can make that decision now and have it happening tomorrow, assuming fence is in place. Where if I'm going a route of seeding it out, well, you're talking months now of planning ahead. Would you go that route of doing this type of bale grazing or rolling out bales? Or do you try and approach it like you have in the past of, I know I need 16 acres, so last year in mid to late 2017, you started thinking about and planning for this conversion?
Yeah, no, I planned it all out. We started looking pretty hard at it, probably by early summer. And then by the fall, we had made the decision that we were going to do it. And we've never really borrowed a bunch of money before to, build fence and things of that nature. But this was a pretty big bite. We couldn't get any external fence money from the NRCS. So, this was something that the free market had to step up and pay for completely. So we made the decision to go ahead and do it. And what I did, because all those things with bale grazing are great, but it takes some assumptions. You have to assume that you're going to be able to buy bales really cheaply, and that is not the case here. I know a lot of people talk about this and say, well, so-and-so does it, so you're wrong if you don't do it that way. Well, so-and-so can buy hay for half the price or less that I can buy hay for. You're also assuming that the seeds in those bales are seeds that you want to grow in your new perennial pasture. Not all seeds are created equal. There is a seed bank there. Stuff will grow. It can be very productive. It can be highly beneficial. But by choosing which seeds I put out there, I'm guaranteeing that I'm getting the varieties I want that mature at the proper times, to establish a really top-notch perennial grazing pasture. I feel like I've got a blank, slate here. I can do whatever I want. The cost of the seed is actually pretty low. We're kind of, taking kind of a two-step approach. So what I did last fall was I went in and I planted what's called cereal rye, and it's a winter hardy variety. I planted that about the end of the first week, beginning of the second week in November. About 3 weeks later, it sprouted. It's just kind of been sitting there. Now we're having a very late, cold, wet spring here. My thought process was last fall I should be able to put the cows on that about the end of March, maybe beginning of April. Now it's probably going to be the middle to end of April before we can graze that. But once the soil temperatures get up, and that stuff's already about 3 to 4 inches tall, once the soil temperatures get up and we get just a week or so of pretty good spring-like weather where it's 60 to 70 degrees, that cereal rye will take off like a rocket. Like it can literally grow 4 to 6 inches a day. So we'll have that out there, and then we're going to turn 50 cows out on it. Okay. And we've got lots and lots of manure and urine and carbon getting put back into the soil very, very quickly. That is going to be kind of a 3-step process. What we'll do is once we get into about the middle of May, the cereal rye is going to be done. The plan is right now to bring in some chicken litter. And this is not from an organic source. This is probably going to come from a Purdue or Tyson chicken house. Don't send me hate mail. It's still organic in nature. It's going to add nitrogen. It's going to add potassium. It's going to add phosphorus. And again, it's organic in nature. Could there be some trace stuff in there I'm not crazy about? Absolutely. We can have that spread and put onto the field pretty economically. And what we'll then do is go in and disc up the remnants of the cereal rye, disc in this chicken manure. And yeah, I said disc. I know that's kind of, that's a no-no in regenerative agricultural circles. But we want to break up all that carbon material, and we want to work this nitrogen into the soil and get a good seed bed. And then we're going to go in with sorghum Sudan grass, which there is nothing I'm aware of that produces like sorghum Sudan grass. That stuff produces just tons and tons and tons of feed per acre. And we're going to graze the cows on that all summer. And then by that time, I'm hopeful that our NRCS grant will come through and will pay for the installation of the carefully designed, carefully thought out perennial seeding that we want to put into this pasture. And about the 1st of September, we'll do the same thing. We'll wash, rinse, repeat, go in, terminate this, disc it up, add more chicken manure. Now we've got some biology out there. We will have been putting biology out there for about 10 months. We'll have been grazing it all spring, all summer. Lots of biomass getting worked into the soil. I guarantee you, and we're going to soil test this every step of the way. I'll guarantee you it's 1% or lower soil organic matter right now. I should have my first test results back very, very soon. And I want to try and double that, just this year. That's my goal. I don't know if it'll happen, but I want to get some biology out there, get some carbon breaking down, get the manure, get the urine, get things going, get some microbial activity in the soil before we go and spend the money on the perennial planting. But that's kind of the little bit more of a dialed in approach that we're taking with this. It's been a big project. I mean, there's about 4,000 feet of fence, 8 wires that we had to build. We've got 3 gates we're installing this week. We had to have a bridge put in because we got a pretty sizable branch creek that kind of separates this area from an existing area. So we got to build a laneway over that. This was about a $10,000 project. It wasn't a drip in the bucket, certainly.
So just to make sure I'm on the same page, and for those following along at home, when you looked at this pasture conversion, you start with a row crop field that probably doesn't have the best soil to start with. When I was at your farm last summer and we'd recorded some of the video from the course, it's actually in one of the course videos. We stepped on your neighbor's property and put a shovel in the ground, and it came up in chunks, clods of clay. So the thought there is, if you go right into that with your perennial pasture, you're fighting an uphill battle. And you're trying to find a way to say, well, I want to get production now, but I also want to set myself up in the future to have these perennials really succeed in the best conditions possible. So you looked at ryegrass, which would give you spring grazing, and then you have a plan for a summer crop that'll give you summer grazing that are all just temporary to feed the cows, get the cows out there so they can do all the things cows do, poop, pee, and stomp on the pasture to get the soil biology going, like you were saying, when it comes time to plant those perennials later this year.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And here's the thing. We have to cash flow all this. I did not have the cash to just say, okay, here's, $10,000 to bing, bang, boom, install this. I had to get a loan, which when it comes to business debt, I'm okay with some strategic borrowing here and there for, in our case, projects like this. But I've got to cash flow this from a rent prospect. That $10,000 doesn't include the $130 per acre I have to pay my family per year to have access to this ground. So that's another $2,000. I have to have production off of this. And the way to succinctly accomplish all these things is through annuals. And the sorghum Sudan, like, that's not an inexpensive seed. It's downright expensive. But the cereal rye is cheap. It really is cheap. And we've started the process, 5-6 months ago, going back to the beginning of November, by planting that seed, getting something out there growing, getting something alive. I mean, this soil is dead. It is absolutely dead. There's nothing there.
How long had it been row crop for?
I can't remember it ever not being row cropped. I'll be 44 years old this year. So it's been at least 40 years since it was anything other than a row crop field.
Let's say last summer you didn't want to take on that debt and you decided, or maybe contextually, planting seed just wasn't for you. And you went this bale grazing approach that, again, we get a lot of emails on this. Can you walk through how that would potentially play out leading to planting perennials, say, in September of this year? Would it be you're starting to put bales out there in November? Well, once the fence is up, so say now, and then you're just rolling out those bales. And how would you compare these economically for people who might be considering the bale approach versus the seed approach?
By comparison, the cereal rye that I planted, by the time I rented the drill, paid for the fuel, bought the seed, I had about $600 in that. That's pretty inexpensive, and I'm going to get way more forage from that $600 than I could have gotten had I gone and purchased hay bales. And this is one of those things where Just because a big name person says, well, you should only ever do this on a YouTube video doesn't mean that that's going to work for you in your situation with your economics and your context. The way I compare this is that $600, if I were to go to buy round bales of hay, the best I could have done last fall, and I know because I actually bought a little bit of extra hay last fall. Here, those were selling for $40 to $50 per bale. So I might have gotten 12 to 16 bales of hay with that same money, with that same $600. Okay, so that's one way to look at this. The thing with bale grazing that nobody ever tells you is the cows will waste at least half of the hay. They get in there, they tear it up, and unless you're going to put feeders around it and move those feeders, which kind of sort of defeats the purpose. I mean, part of the purpose is you want them to sort of waste some of the hay so you get the carbon out there, get some organic matter on top of the ground. I'm doing the same thing. I'm just going to accomplish that with a plant. And I'm going to get, that 12 to 16 bales of hay, like with my herd, that would last maybe 3 weeks. Okay. With the cereal rye, I'm going to be able to graze that for 6 weeks. So I'm literally kind of doubling the, bang for buck based on my regional pricing for hay. It's really expensive here. If you're in an area where you can go buy round bales for $20, and those areas exist in Kentucky and Missouri and other places, this could be a very different conversation. You can also lease ground for a fraction of what it costs me to lease ground. So economically, that can pencil out very differently. And it's just something I want to caution people on, from watching the next YouTube video and saying, well, no, you have to do it this way because so-and-so said. Well, it works for so-and-so, again, with their context in that region and those economics, that doesn't always translate. If they can buy hay for $20 a bale and they can rent ground for $30 an acre, yeah, it makes sense. And I think it's something that's plausible. But for us, it just doesn't work. And then the flip side of that is I've got to have cattle production coming off of that 16 acres this year, because I did take out a loan to make that first loan payment. So, could I have built cheap, skimpy fence? Yes, I could have. Contextually, we've got 1,300 feet next to a state highway where semis constantly travel 60 to 70 miles an hour. I'm not comfortable having cattle 20 feet away from said semi with, a single strand or two strands of hot wire on, a simple push-in rod post that, super inexpensive, super quick to put up, but it isn't, it's like a screen door in a submarine in terms of holding stuff in. Like animals are going to get out. It's just it's a matter of when, not if. That brings up a whole liability issue. So you really have to kind of analyze, every situation. And I'm really risk adverse. So to me, I'd rather just build the fence right from the get-go, pencil it out. I know we can sell the beef. We've sold the beef to pay for the project, to cash flow it, to make the lease payment. And I feel like at the end of the day, we're going to get more grazing. We're going to get more biomass down on the ground than if we were to do bale grazing.
I guess that's the thing about putting stuff on top of the soil is you keep the biology up. We all know that plants grow, they put sugars and stuff down into the soil via roots that stimulates biology deeper in the soil. If you think about these plants, which will be growing, one scenario is the weather just works against you. You've had crazy weather already this year. Let's say you plant that sorghum Sudan grass in May, and let's say for the most part that crop is no good. It comes up, but the weather's funky, it's thin, or there's just not enough there to graze. How would you deal with a situation like that?
At that point, the fallback is to go out with something like a pearl millet, which is next best thing. You try again. It's less expensive, doesn't produce near as much forage, but you could have a grazable forage in 20 to 30 days. So pretty quick. And it is a cut and come again. They'll just, it'll just keep on growing all season long while the cows graze it. So that's kind of the fallback position. And, none of these are anything we're going to want to plant before May 15th. We'll just kind of have to see what the weather's doing and, try. You want to plant it as early as you can so you can get the most mileage out of it. But, certainly with the cost of the seed and the fuel and the drill and everything else and your time, you want to make sure that you get good contact and you get a nice stand. But yeah, if we have a failure, we'd just go out there with something else and just try it again. And there's a lot of different things we could do that with, but millet is the one that really jumps to the front of my mind.
From a whole farm grazing perspective, is this new 16 acres of pasture a nice to have in terms of the herd, or is it a need to have?
Must have, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. No, it's must. This is must have grazing.
There has to be a way to get production off of this year to support the number of cows you have.
Right, exactly. It was that, or our cattle enterprise was going to stagnate. Like, this was the path forward.
Now, looking ahead to establishing this as a future perennial pasture, can you talk about how you approached the perennial planting from a NRCS funding standpoint?
Yeah, so what we did is got in touch with our local NRCS office last fall and put in for this and a couple other things. We're still eligible to do some internal fence, and we're definitely going to need some internal fence over there. Not a lot. We also applied for some buried water so that we can extend our buried water system from the adjacent pasture over that direction. And, my hope is that we'll have that like even maybe sometime this spring so that we can this fall go ahead and late summer, early fall, go ahead and get that buried water line in, maybe not serviceable, but get it in, out in the field, and then get that groundwork back down, and then hopefully we get that the grant to establish the perennials. And I've done this in the past. I took another old soybean field a few years ago, waited till the following spring, just went out there and planted all my seed, didn't use anything. No organic fertilizer, no commercial fertilizer, no nothing. And it really struggled. And it's still kind of struggling to this day. It's been an uphill battle for the last few years to get it to be productive. And I feel like it could have been a whole lot more productive if I would have kind of taken these tweener steps. So for me, there's experience that plays into all this decision making. And I don't know, like this, I'm kind of excited about it. Like, we've got my great uncle's old 10-foot disc here that I pulled out of the weeds a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to get that thing functional just so that we can go chop up this root mass and what's left laying on top. This is where a disc is actually a productive tool from a regenerative standpoint. It's just going to get used 2 times. But it's going to really speed up the restoration process so that when we do go plant those perennials, we've got a nice bed to plant them into. Something I heard a couple of years ago, back when I traveled out and spoke at PB3, and I know I've mentioned this before, sitting in a class with Darren Doherty, and it was actually something that Darren didn't say. It was something his wife said, that they learned early on with their landscaping business when they were trying to restore areas, was that you'd get something like this and you'd go out there and plant trees, and the trees would struggle because there was nothing in the soil at all to feed the trees. And she said the lesson they learned was you don't want to plant a $20 tree in a 50-cent hole, meaning that the soil is just so crappy and so devoid of anything good that it can't support that tree, and that tree is going to stagnate or struggle or possibly even die, and then you've wasted your energy, your time, your capital on a tree that really didn't have a shot. And to a great degree, I feel the same about grass. Like it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. And look, I'm hoping to get a grant, which technically is somebody else's money, but I want to be a good steward with that grant. I don't want to waste it. I want to get a really nice perennial stand out there to come up so that in 2019 we've got some really great pasture that's ready to rock and roll and be productive for decades to come.
For one of those early fertility kicks, you're using that imported chicken manure. What's that cost you per acre?
To get that applied, it's going to cost us around probably about $70 an acre, $75 an acre. Which is equivalent with just calling the co-op and saying, hey, come out here and, spray, chemical-based nitrogen fertilizer on the ground, ammonia, anhydrous ammonia, which is not something I really want to do, So this is, to me, like this is an acceptable mid-level replacement. This is a waste product. Yeah, it's coming out of a conventional chicken house. But even conventional chicken is getting better in terms of what they're feeding the animals. I mean, it's by no means great. I'm not advocating conventional chicken by any stretch of the imagination. But this is a waste product that has value, and like it's got to go somewhere. All these things have been taken out of the earth, given to these chickens. The chickens drop it out the business end. I'm taking it, putting it back into the earth, putting it to good use, and trying to stimulate this biology. So it's, like I said, it's about the same as just calling the co-op and having them spray. It's a whole lot more work on my part, but I feel better about using it than I do using a conventional fertilizer.
So you get the fertility input in there early on when these perennial pasture seeds do hit soil. In terms of those perennial pasture seeds, can you talk about thought process behind the seed mix that goes into the perennial pasture? I'm assuming it's a few different things. It's what's producing when, what it's adding to the pasture in terms of versatility or diversity. How do you design these blends?
That's something where I've got I've kind of got a go-to guy that's a technical advisor for a seed company I work with. He's not a salesperson, which is nice. He's also a farmer, and he's an organically minded farmer. I'd say he's maybe a little bit less organically minded than myself, but he does all these things. He uses all these techniques and these products, and he raises grass-fed cattle on his farm. He makes hay on his farm, which kind of goes hand in hand with, we're also at the same time all this is going on, we're converting another 15 acres into additional hay this year. So I'm spending a lot of time with him on the phone, coming up with the design mix on what's going to go into that. And yeah, it's going to be a wide range, a diverse mix of cool season and warm season. There'll be grasses, there'll be legumes, there'll be multiple varieties of those things. They will mature at different times. They will be specifically selected for grazing, because you have grasses and legumes that are meant for grazing. They've got a higher palatability. They might have a higher sugar content versus something that's meant specifically for hay. And that kind of goes back to, with a bale of hay, and it's not all bad. There's seed there. I get it. But you don't get to choose the seed. And maybe that bale of hay has GMO alfalfa in it. You don't know. Or maybe it has all varieties of forages that were designed for a hay field, not for grazing. It's very different. And again, not all seeds are created equal. There's a lot of, third-party, independent, verified science out there that shows, well, you take, company A, company B, company C, and you plant their, XYZ mix, you're going to get, X pounds of, dry mass or forage per acre, from company A versus 20% less from company B and 50% more from company C. I want to get the forages that give me the best chance of success, that give my animals the best chance of success. And they're not all created equal. And there's no GMOs in any of this. These are just varieties that have been trialed and selected and tested for their specific purpose.
How much of those varieties are location specific? So this is Indiana specific or central Indiana specific?
Yeah, no, you want to get seed varieties that are as close to home as possible. When it comes to plants and something like cattle, or sheep or goats or anything where they're just grazing, like the closer to home, the better. Microevolution with an animal, they will adapt to we say fescue, and there's hardly an area in the country, at least out here where we get this stuff called rain. I don't know about Southern California, where you have fescue, right? But the varieties of fescue are enormous, and the differences in them are staggering. So you want to get an animal that is adapted to eat the fescues that are persistent in your region. So that's one reason I don't like getting cows any further from home as humanly possible. And the same thing can kind of be said for seed. It's used to the climate in your region. It's been developed for the climate in your region. Now, that's probably a little less specific than getting grazing ruminants as close to home as possible. But yeah, I would never order perennial seeds for grass, from a company that was not in my same zone. And I use Byron Seeds, and they are located in Rockville, Indiana. It's an Amish-owned company. And they'll even tell you, like, oh, well, you're up here, which might be, 100 mile north. Don't use this variety of clover. That is meant for a slightly warmer climate. You want to use this variety of clover. I mean, they've really got it dialed in, and they've got these technical advisors that, again, use these products, raise animals, raise livestock, and they're just a wealth of knowledge to help you really, get the mix that's best for your farm and your situation.
With this custom blend of seeds, what do you think you'll be into for that per acre?
That wouldn't surprise me if with fuel and seed and drill and the whole bit, it might be like, $125, $150 an acre, something like that. And then we'd have obviously we'd have the chicken litter on top of that. So, it could be a couple $100 an acre, which is $3,200 roughly, which is not an insignificant amount of money. But then we have a pasture that really shouldn't need a whole lot for the next 10 years. So when you amortize that out, even if you don't have any grant money, you're really only talking about, maybe $200-$300 a year.
If you go ahead and go through with that, if it all falls into place and you drill those seeds in this fall, a year from now, April 2019, are you grazing that pasture?
Possibly by late April, definitely probably by the middle of May. We might graze it lightly the first couple of times, just to see how the plants react, see how strong the roots are. But yeah, I mean, by the time we get into summer, I'm fully expecting that pasture to be at 90% production level. So I'll watch it a little more closely than I would watch an existing stand, just because it is new. Those plants are young, and some plants it takes them really 2 years to fully develop. So you don't want to, you never want to overgraze, but you don't even want to graze one of those plants to the level you normally would during its development stage. But yes, no, it would have to be productive from a perennial standpoint no later than June of 2019.
If you think about establishing all this on a conventional row crop field, which has been farmed that way for as long as you can remember and beyond, chemicals are on the field. The leftover fertilizers, great. That's just going to help you. Might not be ideal, but that's just going to make the plants grow. Any concerns over persistence of herbicides on the field or the soil? And what's been your experience with that? Is that a factor?
Is it a concern? I mean, I think yes, always is the short answer. How grave of a concern? Not that big. So there hasn't been any chemical fertilizer applied to this particular pasture. It would have been applied probably in the fall of 2016 after the corn crop came out. They would have fertilized then. Most likely. I know it's been limed. It's had lime put on it, but that's a fairly natural, benign thing. It would have had a burn down put on it about a year ago to rid any weeds out there before the beans were planted. I know a little bit of that was done, but frankly, it was so wet last spring that I'm not even sure they got a full application of that on. Point being, it's been at least 12 months since anything was sprayed or applied to that. Will there be some residual out there? Yes. Will that get taken up in the plants a little bit? Yes, a little bit. Is there anything you can do about it? No. I mean, look, this is just the state of agriculture. This is what we've got to work with. And it's real easy to get into a utopian discussion about, well, if it was mine, then I would do it this way. Well, great. If it's yours, do it that way if that's what makes you tick. I'm looking at, we have got to get our row crop fields restored. This country has got about 60 years left of topsoil, if you believe a lot of the studies that are out there. And there's nothing that makes me think those are wrong, because it's a bit doomsday, right? If you think about it, we have got to get soils restored. We've got to get grazing animals on these soils. And if it's 1 acre at a time, 16 acres at a time, 160 acres at a time, I don't really care. We need to see grass growing out there. We can gripe and moan and complain about the nuance of how somebody goes about making that happen. At the end of the day, who cares? Make it happen. We as Americans like to bitch and argue about a whole host of things on both sides of the political spectrum. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, you know what? In 60 years, if we don't get this corrected, my grandkids, this country is not going to be able to feed them. They're going to have to import food. So are all of those things a concern? Yes. They don't outweigh the dismal future that lies on the horizon for this country if we don't get things turned around. So I have had a paradigm shift in the past 5 years about idealistic methods. And, I'm truly functionally organic at heart, but at the same time, we have to be pragmatic in, trying to arrive at our utopian destination. And to me, this is one of those times.
And it doesn't sound like there will be enough residual herbicide to just prevent things from germinating. I mean, that would be my ignorant concern, not knowing really anything about that subject.
Right. Well, no, I mean, the cereal rye is already germinated. I mean, it's growing. It's growing. And, Yeah, I think, once we get through 2 rounds of annuals, you're basically at that point, you're talking 18 to 20 months post application before we put those perennials in. Crap, you're 16 months away from qualifying for certified organic status on that pasture. If you were to do everything organically from day one, you'd have to use all organic seed and whatnot and things of that nature. And you couldn't use the conventional chicken litter, but from a herbicide standpoint, it's 36 months.
So you lease this land, you don't own it, but you lease it from family on let's call it a perpetual lease. For people that are out there leasing land thinking about this, what would you want in terms of a lease to go down this path? I'm thinking tenure.
Yeah, minimum of 5 years, minimum. And I think if you said you could get a 5-year lease, you can still apply for some NRCS grant funding. Now, keep in mind, the landowner is, as I understand it, is going to get the 1099 in that situation. So, I might be inclined to maybe I build my Fort Knox fence along the highway, and then maybe I build something a little bit less expensive on the other 3 sides. Or, if we don't have a road right nearby, then, I'd be just using some T-posts and, some of the corner bracing kits that you can buy from Ken Cove that are probably going to last 4 or 5 years. And you put up, 3 wires, 4 wires, and you call it good. You keep it cheap. If you say, hey, you can get a 10-year lease on something like this, then you can, look at, go ahead and building a more permanent fence. But, all those factors depend on how many years you can get it for, what your long-term goals are, what the annual lease is per year. If I was in a region of the country where I could lease ground for, 30 or 40 bucks an acre, and I hear these stories, I'd be forking over a check for like 2 or 3 years up front to get them to sign a 10-year lease on the ground, because no one can take that away from you. Even if it changes hands, you have that ground leased. The next landowner would have to honor it. So it can make sense if you don't own the property. And who's to say that a lease agreement couldn't include a right of first refusal with an option to buy should the property ever become available for sale?
So a lot of changes ahead here on your pastures. You're putting in a hayfield. We can talk about that in a future episode, and also follow along with the progress of this as it unfolds throughout the season. But now I guess the hope is just to be able to get the cows out there, because you guys still have some snow on the ground.
Yeah, it's still been snowing. It's been a bit manic here. It's mostly it's been about 20 to 30 degrees below normal. We're still having below freezing at night, and we're in the middle of April, which is really, really crazy. So yeah, the cows are ready to be off the hay, and they're ready to be on something green. So I'm hoping here in the next week or two we can get them over there and really get this process started. For real, by getting the biology going and moving forward, so that we can get this set up to plant it into some perennials. And my goal is to document this as I go all summer. Take soil tests in between every pre and post from each annual crop, and before we get the perennials in the ground, and to document all this and all these costs and results and strategy. All these things are actually going to get rolled into an upcoming module in our Business Essentials online course. So we're just going to take all this documentation and put a whole nother module together on it. So that resource is out there for people who have the course and find themselves in this position.
There you have it, Darby on converting burned out old row crop land into nice new perennial grass for grazing cattle on. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more on it in the future, let me know. This is one of those topics that I'm not sure where it falls on the interest level. So let me know what you think. Is this something you want to hear more about? And specifically, what types of subjects within this would you want to hear more about? Shoot me an email on that. As I look ahead through the rest of the year, one thing we will do, though, is we will follow up on the progress of this row crop conversion that Darby's doing. So expect an episode on that. And I'll probably also be bringing some video your way, both via YouTube and through the Farm Business Essentials online course. If you want to learn more about that course, be sure to check it out at farmbusinessessentials.com. That course is something that Darby and I put together with the goal of helping you to start your own livestock-based farming enterprise. That course covers everything that you need to know when you go to start a business. From choosing a corporate structure, to insurance, to farm infrastructure, to managing animals, such as cattle. And speaking of that, there's a whole module within the course on grass-fed beef, along with other modules on pastured poultry and forest-raised or pastured pork. If you want to learn more about the course and see sample content, go out to farmbusinessessentials.com. That course is only going to be live and available between now and June 1st. After June 1st, the course goes away until October. So if you want any of that content between now and October, jump on and get it now. Otherwise, you'll have to wait. Once again, check it out at farmbusinessessentials.com. Thanks for listening. That's all for this one. Stay tuned next Monday for another episode of Grass-Fed Life, where it's all about raising cows, pigs, and chickens profitably on pasture with farmer Darby Simpson.